just finished writing a book, and that's the title of it. And I'll just sort of flip through it real quick. This is just kind of like the Cliff Notes. And, you know, I always like to step back and ask, you know, what's the bigger picture? What's the big picture? And this is the big picture. It doesn't matter really what the issue is when you're talking immigration, gay rights, civil rights, environment, voting, animal rights, anything, name your right. The left doesn't care at all about that right. They care about how it can facilitate their seizing more power. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. That's a direct quote from a 60s radical. And the point is that all of those issues are simply vehicles for them to obtain that one single agenda that's important to them, and that's power. So how does the immigration, refugee, resettlement agenda facilitate that? Well, it dilutes American culture. We forget who we are. It sucks up welfare resources. It creates chaos, division, racial and ethnic tension, fiscal stress, and unemployment among citizens, whereas the replacement populations take the jobs too. And the most important thing is it cultivates loyal voters for left-wing politicians who at this point are largely, if not entirely, Democrats. And the goal ultimately is to establish a permanent progressive majority. That's their term, a permanent progressive majority. That's what they want. And it's basically saying the left gets to dictate, gets to become the dictators. Now, this is the interesting part. Refugee resettlement agenda was established in the 70s. It has nothing to do with the wars that are going on now or all of the, you know, that facilitates it. But the agenda was set at the 1976 Conference on Human Settlements that was in Vancouver, Canada. And that laid also the groundwork for Agenda 21. I don't know if you know about that, but the Conference on Human Settlements was all about population and what to do with them. And here's where some of the universal goals. The first one, right in their preamble, was abolish private property. And I have, there's a longer quote that I have in the book, which is really creepy. But it says, private property is unacceptable, and all property has to be controlled and owned by the government. It's too important to be left in private hands. This is a UN. This is a UN. Yeah, this is a UN document that came out of this Conference on Human Settlements.
So they're not going to have Donald Trump speak there, are they?
Pardon?
They're not going to have Donald Trump speak there.
You never know. And the other thing was what they want to do. The United Nations is comprised of all socialists. They want redistribution, but we always think of it as redistribution of income. No, they want redistribution of land, resources, and populations across the globe. It's unfair that the Somalis have to live in the desert while we get to live in this nice rolling countryside. That's unfair. We got to redistribute the land so that they get to be here and we get to be there. That kind of thinking. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And the only thing about this is, and it says all nations should immediately develop settlement policies. This is all in 1976. And in the book that I wrote, I go through more detailed explanation of all that with some pithy quotes and stuff. But the thing to note here, who pays attention to this? None of the communist countries pay attention to it. Are you kidding? We're going to ask China to accept a bunch of refugees from Somalia? No way. Ask Russia to accept a bunch of Congolese? Not a chance. They'll be shot at the border. Cuba? Forget it. Everybody's trying to flee them in boats. It all comes to the West because really the West is the target because the West isn't yet socialist. Not completely. So that's the real target. The real agenda is the West. Most people don't know, I don't know if you guys do, but the UN Charter was written by Alger Hiss. Anybody know who Alger Hiss was?
Yeah.
Yeah, he is a traitor. He was in the FDR administration. He was a Soviet agent. He's the reason, or one of the reasons, why FDR turned over Eastern Europe to Stalin at the Yalta Convention. He was whispering in his ear the entire time. He was a really effective Soviet agent, and he was tasked with creating the conference that wrote the UN Charter. So, you ever wonder why the UN is so anti-American and seemingly so pro-Soviet and pro-Chinese and all that? That's why. It was always intended to be a vehicle for Soviet foreign policy. That was always its intention. So when we pay attention to that, we are listening basically to the KGB telling us what to do. Here's the sequence. Now, there's 3 different ways. Either the UN High Commissioner refers refugees, or there's other refugees that are considered for entrance based on humanitarian or family reunification considerations. Say, for example, in Iraq, you know, you have people fleeing ISIS there. Maybe some of them will be resettled here, although they haven't really been thinking too much about the Christians. Almost all of the refugees we get from those regions are Muslim, not Christian. And then family reunification considerations for refugees that are already here. They bring their families over. But the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, his referrals, his list of refugees gets #1 priority. And there's overseas refugee processing centers, which are run by non-governmental organizations like the International Rescue Committee, World Relief, and they evaluate these refugees. And then the U.S. voluntary agencies, that resettlement agencies, meet once a week and decide where these refugees are going to be placed. They sit there in a meeting amongst themselves and say, well, there's a good Bantu population in Concord. Let's send them to Concord. There's a good Bosnian population in Springfield. Let's send them to that kind of thing. And they decide where they go. That's how it works. The United States accepts over half of the world's refugees, more than all other resettlement nations combined. We're the largest resettlement country in the world. Besides the the countries that, like, for example, Turkey and Lebanon that border Syria, where people just flee across by the millions and set up tent cities. But that's a different story. That's supposed to be temporary. So here's the other. This is another interesting way of showing how it's grown. The refugee program is currently capped at 70,000 people. However, that's not the entire refugee program. There's also asylum seekers, which are running at about 25,000. But now they have a new category called Follow to Join, which is the families of asylum seekers. Once an asylum gets over here, and then they have special immigrant visas, SIVs. Those are for Iraqis and Afghanis. It was 10,000 people in 2014. And then the diversity visa, which is basically a lottery for people from everywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world people can come. And there's 50,000 of them, and they come from everywhere. A lot from Africa. And the Cuban Haitian program, they don't publicize how many Cuban Haitians come in. It's at least 20,000 a year. So you're looking at, in 2013, like 175,000, not the 70,000. It's a huge number. Anybody know how many legal immigrants we allow in every year? Never mind the illegals. Anybody know? 1 million. 1 million legal immigrants a year. 140 of those, 1,000 of those come from Muslim countries. 160,000 of them come from communist countries. Yeah, it's a huge, huge issue. We need to draw way back on legal immigration as well as illegal immigration. And they're opening the floodgates to both.
Are you familiar with Canada's immigration policy where you have to be self-sustained for, like a family has to actually sponsor you?
Yeah, but see, the Canadian government, for all its drawbacks, pursues policies based on somewhat sane thinking. The United States, we're absolutely gone totally around the bend.
Yeah, because I know you need to have like $70,000-$80,000 somebody has to put up to bring you in the country, so you don't land on welfare your first 2 or 3 years here.
Yeah.
So it's their responsibility to pledge that money to make sure you're self-sufficient within a period of time.
Yeah. Great ideas, which is why they will never be adopted here, at least under the current administration, because the current administration's goal is to get as many people as possible jammed into the United States, because their goal is, as I say, is to erase America. It's to dilute our culture and bring in people who are reliable Democrats, period. Period. They don't care about anything else. They don't care about the crimes. North Carolina has an epidemic of child rapes because of the number of illegal aliens that have settled in North Carolina. And for some reason, illegal aliens from Central America, especially Mexico, have a proclivity for kids. Don't ask me why, but that's a statistical reality. And in North Carolina, there's like 5,000 rape arrests over the last 17 months. 5,000, and that's child rapes.
Can they deport them when that happens? Is there a law to deport them?
Well, you know, they have this famous case there where this one illegal alien killed 3 people with his car, and I think he's got a new trial. I forget exactly, but no, he didn't get deported. Okay, so here's the basic resettlement costs. Processing from Department of Homeland Security is about $32 million. State Department admissions costs are about $400 million. Health and Human Services is the agency with the Refugee Resettlement Office. So we're talking $600 million in fiscal year 2014, so that's $1.1 billion. However, that's not the whole story. The 9 voluntary agencies, some of that is mixed in here. The voluntary agencies get a lot of whatever's here. But here it breaks down exactly what the different voluntary agencies get. Church World Services, $46 million. That's the Ethiopian Community Development Council, $14.8 million. Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, $17.7 million. International Rescue Committee, $92 million. Lutheran Immigrant, I like to call them liars, Immigration and Refugee Service, $56 million. Catholic Charities, $500 million for Catholic Charities. They really got it nailed.
Got the business part down.
Huh?
They got the business part down.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
They do. So all those together. Now these are 9 voluntary agencies, but then at the bottom 2, BCFS is Baptist Child and Family Services. They got $291 million in 2014. Actually, they got a lot more than that. Oh no, that's what they got. That's right. And Southwest Key is an organization which deals strictly with unaccompanied alien children, although I think they're branching out into refugees. They got $182 million last year. The unaccompanied alien children total to those 2 organizations, some of these other ones and then additional ones behind that, where it was over $800 million last year. So that's not included in this.
In your research, you ever look into the CFOs or all the executives in those organizations who kind of
Yes, yeah. My book goes into that. My book list names them, describes their background, and tells what they make. Like, for example, the International Rescue Committee. Is it International Rescue Committee or is it World Relief. I think it's International Rescue Community. David Miliband was the Labour Party, British government Labour Party candidate for Prime Minister a couple of years back, and he lost. And he is now the CEO of International Rescue Community. He makes $500,000 a year. He's a socialist. And then the Church World Service, CWS at the top. And these numbers are not necessarily the entire story. This is the best I could get through a very careful review of the data. They have a program where you can, but there's so many different subgroups with so many different names, it's hard to be confident that you're getting it all. But that's most of it, if not all of it. Church World Services is a subsidiary of the U.S. Council of Churches. Anybody know about the U.S. Council of Churches? It's the follow-on to the Federal Council of Churches, which was a communist front group. And the Federal Council of Churches became the U.S. Council of Churches in 1950s, and the U.S. Council is a subsidiary of the World Council of Churches, and the World Council of Churches is controlled by the Soviet KGB. FSB, if you prefer. Still the KGB.
And they're in no hurry. As long as their plan gets followed through, right?
The World Council of Churches was subverted in the 70s by the Soviets, although I believe that it was always a Soviet sponsored organization. And the U.S. Council of Churches, for example, remember Alien Gonzalez, the kid from Cuba who came over with his mother, and his mother drowned, and he was staying in that house, and then the Marshal Service came in and dragged him off. That was a low point in our history. But the Cuban Council of Churches, subsidiary of the World Council of Churches, contacted their friends in the U.S. Council of Churches to prevail on them to talk to the Clinton administration about getting Elian Gonzalez back to Cuba. So it was the U.S. Council of Churches that promoted that pushed that. And I include that little story in the book too. So there's just a graphical picture of it. 2014, 1.3 billion, and that's not all of it. If I included all of the unaccompanied alien children, it would be like 2 billion. So these voluntary agencies, the VOLAGs we call them, they lobby for advantages even though they are non-profits. They're not supposed to lobby, but nobody stops them. There's something called Wilson-Fish states. It's a law based on the names of the two congressmen who passed it. State programs where there's no oversight. The voluntary agency, whether it's Catholic Charities or World Relief, they run the whole thing themselves with no oversight from any no oversight from any government agency whatsoever. 350 subcontractors in 190 cities. Countless, thousands of community nonprofits that feed on little government grants, and I'll get into that a little bit, and then billions, tens of billions in foundation support from foundations like George Soros' Open Society Institute, the Ford Foundation, which essentially created the current immigration agenda. The Ford Foundation is a radical left organization. One of the Ford brothers or sons or whatever quit in disgust in the 50s because it had been taken over by leftists and they were just doing whatever they want. There's $12 billion they have to play with in the Ford Foundation. And there's a whole bunch of others. I go into a list of them and the people who lead them and how much money they make. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So, the Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement. Here's some numbers for you. There's the unaccompanied alien children at the bottom, and the number that follows it is the coded, it's the grant code that they use, and you can look that up. They have a database. And look at 2014, 803 0.8 million, 0.9 million for the unaccompanied alien children program, which, by the way, were accompanied by an equal number of families. So they weren't unaccompanied at all. There were 65,000 unaccompanied alien children and another 65,000 families. And nobody really bothered to make the distinction of whether they were the unaccompanied alien children families or just somebody else's families who happened to be with them. But they all came across at the same time. They were not unaccompanied. That's the point. State administered programs, $374 million in 2014. That's a lot of change. Voluntary agencies get a bunch. And then there's this discretionary grants, and I'll get into that some. Almost 80 million in 2014, 88 million in 2013. And then targeted assistance, and we'll get into some of that. There's special grants that refugee agencies, post-resettlement agencies, and the refugees themselves can get. For example, the individual development accounts, that is a matching grant program to teach people how to save money. So if you're a refugee and you open a savings account, they will match every dollar you deposit with $1. How do you like that? How do you like that? 100% rate of return on your money. You can't find that too many places. And home-based child care business, you know, the Somali woman that has a bunch of kids and she wants to stay home with them, she puts up a home-based child care business and, you know, welcomes her friends and neighbors' kids in, and she's got a business. Ethnic community self-help. Oh, refugee agriculture. That's community gardens. You know, if you want to be a refugee and make a garden, you can get a grant. It's pretty nice. Nice work if you can get it. So here's one. And this is an example of a small post-resettlement agency getting a government grant to help people grow their own food and start a business. Okay? So here's the nice Somali lady in Portland, Maine, and this is the nice note from the nonprofit agency. And Cultivating Community is the name of the nonprofit agency, and they promote sustainable agriculture. And here's their, this is their IRS tax return form. You can see government grants, 438 million of their total, 438,000 of their total 470,000 comes from government grants. So basically they're running almost 100% on a government grant.
They got good grant writers.
Huh?
They got a good grant writer.
Yeah. Well, there's so many of these things that it's very easy for people to get grants for these things. It's very easy. And this Cultivating Community, it's a small organization. I mean, half a $500,000 is not a lot, but it only has one paid staff member, the head of the agency, and he makes like 80 grand. Nice money, you know. It's nice 40-hour work, dependable money, no big risk, and he's doing the Lord's work, so he thinks. However, all those programs don't wind up really motivating a lot of people. This, of the 752,000 refugees that have come to the United States in the last 5 years, 56% are still on Medicaid or refugee medical assistance, at their own special program for refugees. Cash assistance, 47%. Food stamps, 74%. Public housing, 22%. After 5 years. So all those grants obviously didn't really do much to make them self-supporting and independent. Total cost, and these are my estimates. These are not exact, but they're rough. $6 billion. That doesn't include the unaccompanied alien children who aren't technically allowed to get all this other stuff, but they got a lot of different temporary assistance, and I think some of them wind up on welfare anyway. In any event, that extra cost is actually closer to $4 billion. 3.7 billion is what Obama got for this year. So we're looking at $10 billion a year in refugee welfare costs.
Is that compounded though?
Huh?
Wouldn't that be compounded? I mean, that every year you get more and more in the system that don't.
That's true. That's true.
It's actually
yeah.
compounded
That's
out.
yeah. That this was only for
Five-year
for the last 5 years, and I think the latest year in this last one, because I took it out of a refugee resettlement report, and I think 2012 or 2013 was the last year, so it was from that year back, you know, like 2008 to 2013 or whatever.
Now
So
you have
yes,
people in 2000 that are still on the system that aren't accounted for here.
that's right.
Higher
That's right.
numbers.
And this was an incomplete survey, and it only dealt with refugees and asylum seekers, didn't deal with all the others. There's all the affiliate sites. And then the unaccompanied alien kids, they get some pretty good deals too. This is the Palm Air Resort in Texas, and the Baptist Child and Family Services was going to buy it for $50 million for unaccompanied children and their families. You know, those people that just happen to come with them. And but everybody got so angry they gave up on the deal, and they decided not to. They abandoned the idea. But think of that: $50 million of our money going to buy this for illegal aliens. It's outrageous. And this is the latest, Welcoming America. If you talk to any of these people, they all talk about how we want to create a welcoming environment for these new Americans. That's the mantra, welcoming new Americans. And Obama started that in 2012 with the White House, or actually the White House Task Force on New Americans. It was published in 2014, but they came up with this welcoming agenda in 2012. The idea is welcoming communities and fully integrating immigrants and refugees. So they, using some seed money and a lot of nonprofit organizations that are already in on the deal, they create welcoming agendas. They put up billboards, they hold special celebrations, town, events to cultivate a welcoming attitude among the population. And has nothing to do with the welcoming population getting anything in return. It's just we're supposed to, come on, let's grow up and improve our attitudes about all this and be welcoming neighbors. Welcome the stranger. That's what the religious ones say, because they like to think that that's coming from the Bible. Welcome the stranger. So if you don't do that, you're not a good Christian. You hear me? And so their idea is to create robust, good receiving communities. Not just good receiving communities, but robust good receiving communities. Effective good receiving communities. And recognize, this is quotes, recognize the role everyone must play in furthering the integration of recent immigrants. In other words, if you resist, you are bad. And they have, at the same time, they have, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the Welcoming America program has 18 statewide organizations, 52 city partners in 33 states and Washington, D.C., and they have a Welcoming Refugees subsidiary, which is basically just a website. But it's really a small footprint thing. They use these small organizations like that, that community one that I mentioned before, doing the community gardens. Just small nonprofits. But these small nonprofits leverage their staffs with people from Vista and AmeriCorps, who are paid by the federal government, and all kinds of businesses and larger nonprofits that help them out. So, for example, in Utah, we have Communities United. Their budget is $317,000. It's from one grant from Komen for the Cure, because they have a women's program. Okay, that's all they make, and they have I think the CEO gets a fairly modest $48,000 a year, and then there's a couple of paid staff that get less, but they get help from Welcoming America, they get help from the ACLU, National Council of La Raza, United Way, AARP. This is a philanthropy. American Express. American Express vice president is on their board. March of Dimes, Utah Humanities Council. They even got a grant in 2012 from the EPA. So, and this is a small organization, but it does a lot of stuff. And the Welcoming America is just one small part of what it does. But this is how they do it. You know, it's very distributed. It's very decentralized, but all people playing from the same playbook. Now, what to do about us? These pockets of resistance, they call us, fighting back. They wrote a report called Resettlement at Risk. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the nonprofit paid by us with our money, created this Resettlement at Risk report that identifies bad people like you and me for sitting here trying to strategize about how to stop this massive influx. And they use the Southern Poverty Law Center, or they recommend using the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm already very proudly on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate list. I'm on their hate watch list. And my sole sin was accepting a temporary job for the Carroll County, Maryland Board of Commissioners, because they were a bunch of radical right-wing nuts. So that was my sin. I accepted a 4-month job working for them, promoting their radical right-wing lunacy. And the SPLC felt I deserved to be written up. And I've written a very good thing about the SPLC too, at one of the websites that at a place called Capital Research Center. You should read up on the SPLC. They're quite an organization. And now there's this other one, Center for New Community, which wrote a thing called Islamophobia Movement in America, and it lists Frank Gaffney, who's my boss, the guy who sent me up here, Brigitte Gabriel, Pam Geller, you all know Pam, she's the one who had that Texas cartoon thing, Robert Spencer, which is the guy who writes Jihad Watch.
He's been up here several times, by the way, speaking at synagogues. I've gone
Oh,
to
really?
see him. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, he's good.
Reading us the Quran, just in case somebody didn't know what was in it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, he's really good.
He's actually,
So these are all fanatic haters who need to be vilified. And they've written another one called Islamophobia, the New Nativism, and that's another new buzzword, nativism. And so they attempt to blame racism and xenophobia and stuff like that for inspiring, like the Sikh temple shooting. So we are all the cause of people going off the rails and killing people. Don't you feel ashamed of yourself?
Don't lose your head over it, okay?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You really get tried.
Really? And they get tons of foundation support. Like I mentioned, Soros, Tides Foundation, Ford Foundation, Gill Foundation, which is a guy who...
Tim Gill.
Tim Gill, yep.
Homosexual activist. Yes.
Homosexual activist, yes. And he lives in Colorado, and his money is what helped turn Colorado from a red state to a blue state. And they wrote about it in a book called The Blueprint.
His money has come here.
Huh?
His money has come here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In New Hampshire, oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I detail where
Who is he you're talking about?
his name is Tim Gill, and he has a foundation called the Gill Foundation. And I think I forget, I list in the book how much he's worth, what much the foundation is worth. It's something like 80 million or something like that. But he throws that money around for all these kind of radical left agendas. And a big one is this immigrant and refugee agenda.
Is that part of the Clinton Foundation by any chance?
It's part of the Democracy Alliance. He may have contributed to the Clinton Foundation. I don't know. I don't know.
I was only being sarcastic.
Well, not necessarily.
Really?
And they call this Welcoming America, they call this effort to proselytize us and propagandize us into being welcoming, they call it culture shaping. Is that not Orwellian or what? It's just creepy. And it's supported by, there's a whole network of organizations doing the culture shaping, and they're all supported by them. So.
Oh, more, please.
Oh, yeah.
Crop TV.